All right. Hello to everybody that is tuning in tonight for another wonderful episode with our amazing coaches from the Coaches Corner. I'm just going to say a couple words to get us started, and then I'm disappearing. So for everybody tuning in and watching, by all means, ask questions. Just drop them in the chat box. I'll be keeping an eye on that and passing them off to our coaches. And if for some reason we can't get to everything, head on over to the Coaches Corner because they're amazing, and they will be sure to answer any questions there that you may have that we couldn't get to tonight. So that being said, I'm going to disappear. And Thorfin, I'm going to hand this off to you to open us up.
All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of SCA Coaches Corner. Tonight, we're going to be joined by Duke Sean, Viscount Sagan, Sir Octamasades, and myself as host, Duke Thorfin from the West. And what we're going to do is we're going to have an opportunity to speak to a living legend, Duke Radnor of Guildemar. And so everybody, look forward to this one tonight. I think it's going to be, well, for me, it's a really great night ahead. Okay, so everyone's on board now. Everyone's got their things turned on, right?
We're waiting for Sagan's video.
Sagan, come on back. All right, brother. So I think what we should do is kind of just open up with asking Radnor, kind of give us your background story. Tell us maybe, where did you start the SCA and how'd you find it?
So I grew up in Hawaii from 1962 to the beginning of our relevant story, 1976, when I was a teenager. I think it was the year between junior and senior year in high school, and the local, sorry about that, I'm outside and there's a BART train going by. The local, the state major paper was called the Honolulu Star Bulletin, and it had an article that had a photograph of three guys in chainmail, or one guy definitely in chainmail. I can't quite remember the other two guys, but they're all wearing kind of the great helms and chainmail and big great swords. And it was entitled "The Merry Masochist." And it was about this fellow that had come from the Midwest as a JAG officer in the military for the Marines. And he was Louis Lamos, and he was a fellow that was stationed in Hawaii, and he'd begun the SCA in the middle, and he wanted to start the SCA there. And they had a practice on the campus of University of Hawaii, and that was featured in this article. And when I saw the article, I'd been that kid that was, I was kind of fascinated with the Middle Ages, and was in fact kind of embraced the whole sense of chivalric pursuit as a worldview model, having rejected a bunch of other ones that were available to me. And so when I saw that article, as this 17-year-old kid, I was just nuts. I got to find this thing. And it took about half a year for me to be able to track them down, because where the article said practice was happening, it didn't happen the 2 or 3 times I went there. And to get there, it took a bus. You had to go across the island. You're in high school. It was a big deal. And I really wanted to find these guys. And then finally, on the third try, went to the place where practice was supposed to be happening. Still wasn't there. Feeling dejected, cut across campus to find the bus stop to get back to the windward side of the island. And as I walked across campus, I could hear this now incredibly familiar, these crashes and cracks and taps around the corner. And I came around the corner of some buildings and a quad, and there were these guys, and they were fighting. And they had Freon tank helms, and there was some chain mail, there was some leather, there was lots of 16 gauge galvanized cold rolled steel. But mostly it was like knee pads, elbow pads, hockey gloves, and lots of rattan. And there was probably 6 or 7 guys in armor, 10 or 11 guys there. I arrive out of nowhere and say, "Oh man, I've been looking for you guys forever. This looks cool. I really want to learn how to fight." And they said, "Fine, fantastic. We'll be here next week. Come back with some knee pads and a cup." And I said, "All right, I will, but I want to fight today." Literally, it was. I thought this was the most. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. It was the most awesome thing I've ever seen. And said, "I really want to fight today." And so they, barrier to entry then was pretty light. Shoes were. I'm pretty sure I wasn't wearing shoes. I like slippers. And so knee pads, elbow pads, something for your junk, and a helm, and it was a Freon tank helm. And they put a round shield in my hand and a hockey glove and a big old rattan sword, and gave me the ropes and said, "All right, so here's your round shield. And so when someone goes for your head, you do this. And when someone goes for your leg, you do that." It was rotation blocking, and it was state of the art. And it was, it's exactly what they told me to do. And you do this, and you're going to be on your way. So this was before my senior year of high school. I was kind of this fit young kid, full of enthusiasm, and went out there and felt like I just kicked everybody's ass. I just had a great time and was just whacking folks and getting whacked by folks, but mostly whacking folks. And enough so that in my, God, it's so embarrassing. In my hubris, I said, so you guys are like, are these the guys? Are you guys like all practiced up? And is this how good things get? What are you trying? I said, "Are you guys good or what?" And they said, "Well, yeah, well, welcome to practice. Tell you what, yeah, we're doing our best, and hold on for a second." So they walked over, and they said to the fellow that hadn't been talking, who'd been sitting in a folding chair under the shade of a tree, and said, "This guy, will you go fight him now?" Because obviously they'd asked him to fight me earlier, because they could see that I had absolutely no humility whatsoever. And as I stood out there, I literally said, "Are you guys any good?" And I wasn't meaning like, "I'm so good, how good are you?" It was, "Is this as tough as sword fighting is? Because I'm kind of beating all you guys." And so this fellow stood up finally, after I'd been out there for a while. And to the relief of everyone, he picked up his stick and put on a helmet and walked out. He was about 5'4". He was an old man for my eyes, might have been 30. And what I didn't recognize was that he picked up a bowcan, like actual hardwood bowcan. And he walked up to me, and I thought, "Okay, cool, I'm going to fight this guy. And I hope he's good, because I'm kind of disappointed. I thought these guys were going to be better." And he stood across from me, and he said something, and he kind of bowed. And I said, "Sorry, I didn't hear what you said. What?" And instead of answering me, he took out the bowcan and went, and he went into a stance of intent. "Oh, okay, I get what this is supposed to be about." So I squared up to him, had my round shield and my sword back, and came into range. And this fellow took that bowcan and went up. And of course, what I did was put my round shield up, just like they taught me. That had been blocking all the shots for the most part that I've been getting for the last couple of hours. And as soon as I did that, I don't have any creases in nothing on my thighs. And he hit me with that bouquin across both thighs equally. One was not hit any harder than the other. It had to have been planned. He really dialed me in and just cracked me in the middle of the thighs so hard that I immediately began to cry. I mean, tears sprung out of my eyes. It hurt so badly, and I just collapsed to the ground just in time for his second shot to crack me behind the head. And he hit me in the back of the helm hard enough that not only did it dent the Freon, these were 16 gauge Freon helms. They were super light, but he really kind of dented the hell out of the back of this helm. Enough so that to this day, I can taste the dirt and the earth of it hitting me in the mouth when my head hit the ground when his sword hit me. And I laid on the ground and was literally doing my best not to weep openly. I was really, really hurt. And he just bent down next to my head as I laid there. And he said, what I said was, are you ready to learn? And I think that you and I are going to get to know each other very well. And that was Sanjiro, who was he was a Kenjutsu fighter from Hawaii, a Japanese Hawaiian man who was the bomb. He was super, super good. And he really took me on board. And my response to that moment was, yeah, we really are. Because at that moment, it hit me like an epiphany. Like, oh, this is what I was here for. This is what I wanted. This guy is so good. He smoked me without me even knowing I was getting smoked. And that's exactly what I wanted, I guess, from this kid's head. He wanted to know that swordsmanship was real, and it was tough, and it was, worthy of my time. And so that's the long story short of, from there, I never looked back. And I knew that that's swordsmanship, that chivalric swordplay, chivalric combat was right for me. And that was probably 77, late 77 in Hawaii.
Okay, so that actually kind of leads into another question for me, which actually Sean will actually have something to jump in with us as well, is that you were knighted at a very young age. And I think that with you and Sean, there's two of the youngest knights to ever be made. How old were you when you got knighted? So you started in 77 at the age of 17. And when did you get knighted, and when did you win your first crown?
So I left, I graduated from high school in May of 78. And by early June of 78, Wolf Shulmick Wombat, Brandon D'Arendelle, Greg the Unknown Hawaiian, and I, four guys that were in the SCA there, we all got on the plane and came to California, to Northern California. They had Greg and Brandon had a game system in the early days of like the Gary Gygax D&D stuff.
Which one was it?
Well, it never saw the light of day. It was called this, which stood for This Horribly Intricate System.
Wow.
And it was a terrific combat system. And if we'd had more chops about us, we probably could have brought it into play. I was just young enough that I thought that all of this gaming stuff was all done by adults, and there was nothing new and nothing we could offer. So I was absolutely no contribution to that. But they came over with Chris Kroll, Wombat, and because I'd come here to go to school. I was supposed to start in the fall in Colorado, so I was going to stop through in Northern California to see the SCA and Paula Bellatrix through Bijo Trimble of Caid. Bijo Trimble was a force of Caid in the mid to late 70s, and she and her husband had come to Hawaii and seen the group. And when they heard that 4 of us were going to move to California, she reached out to Paul Bellatrix, and Paul and Carol graciously they took us in. It was very much the ethos of the SCA being a big family. Literally, we came off the plane like standing in the crossroads of reality, having no clue what the hell was going on, and they took us in. So Paula Bellatrix picked us up at the airport, a frightening drive from the airport to his house in Campbell. We'd never been on California freeways before, and I still remember the fear. So Paul took us in, and that was in, let's see, that was June of 78, early June of 78. The first big tournament was June Crown, and that was at Big Trees. And that was my first like major tournament. And so that was June of 78. October Crown of 78. I had gotten some rounds in to the Crown. I was doing well. And then in March of 79, I made the finals. And that Saturday was my birthday. And it was a 3-way finals between Christopher Houghton, Steingrim Stellari, and myself. And that was, interestingly enough, the king that was king when I came from Hawaii was Gregory of York. And Gregory of York was a knight of Caid. And he won the last Crown tournament that was an associated tournament between, while Caid was still part of the kingdom. And so he won that one. And then just over a year later or so, a year and a half, I guess, at this point, that March Crown, it was Steingrim, who, this was the last crown that the Ontarians could fight in as Westerners. And that finals was Steingrim, Christopher Houghton, son of Duke William Houghton, and myself in the finals. And Chris could beat me, I could beat Steingrim, Steingrim could beat Chris. And that happened 3 times. And then it got dark. And so we had to call finals. And that was my birthday party. And so I knew I was going to start finals in the morning. So I couldn't have the I still look back at that birthday and say, oh man, I got to make that up someday. And I will. But the next morning at opening court, they knighted Trelawn of the Woods. Sure. And they knighted me. And so I'd been in the West for about 9 months. I went out and I beat Steingrim. Steingrim beat Chris. Chris beat Steingrim. And then I fought Steingrim again. And Steingrim had he looked at me and he hit me right in the arm. And I was like, oh, I get it, pal. I do that to me too. So he whacked me in the arm, took my arm, won that fight, killed Chris, became king. And so that was my knighting day. And then June Crown, while he was king, I fought again and won that one.
So how old were you when you won?
It was my 19th birthday.
Fuck, that's crazy.
Yeah, you were about a year and a half from when you from
Walked in
when
the
you
door.
first saw the SEA to when you got knighted?
Yeah, in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I was earlier today. I was trying to figure it out, but yeah, about it was my summer between junior and senior year that I went to that first practice, and then it was the summer following my senior year that I went to the West.
And then you were there for 9 months before you got knighted. So a little less than 2 years overall, right?
Yeah, oh, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, fighting in Hawaii was not what you'd be talking about here. It was it was very experimental. So it was slightly different track than you would have within the kingdom. But I mean, I count that as a very positive thing. It was Sanjiro was a terrific teacher.
Well, all right. So what type of weapons forms have you used throughout your career? And like what is your fighting methods? Let's talk about more like something like that.
Well, when I first started fighting, I really wanted to be the knight. I wanted to be the white knight. I wanted to have a curved heater. We didn't even know how to make curved heaters. I came to the West and people had curved heaters. We thought it was the arcane thing, but it was so real. It was what I wanted. And so that first June Crown, I borrowed a bunch of kit because none of my Paul took my helm, and he had it in his hands, and he said, "So this is your helm?" I said, "Yep." And he gave it a little crush. And he said, "You can't wear this, sir." And so that June Crown, I was wearing somebody else's Bliss Brothers. I was actually kitted out in Bliss Brothers stuff, and those of you for whom that name resonates, they did. So it was one of the early pioneers on the West Coast of real armor. And when I say real armor, real constructed armor, the whole steel thing was still very much, 16 gauge, cold rolled steel. We didn't know anything about high carbon stuff. But so I had that kit, and I had a curved heater, and I felt like a knight. And that's what I wanted. And then Paul, whose house I was staying at, and who was the person that, if I could learn anything from anyone, I wanted to learn it from him. And he said, I don't know, you don't want to have a curved heater. Curved heater means that you're just covering up targets. You want something that interrupts your opponent's weapons. You don't want to be waiting and trying to cover. You want to be interrupting and taking control. And so you should have a round shield. And I thought round shields were Saracen, right? I'm 19 years old. It's not. That's not my vision of a knight. I really wanted to be the white knight with the heater. And so I kind of wrestled with that reality for a little while, and that's when I took the round shield and gave it a square top, thinking that would be my compromise. It would be, I'd still kind of feel like I was the knight. I would have a heater kind of, but I would still have the dynamics that were consistent with what Paul was teaching me about a round shield. And that's
so Radnor, you're saying that you're the guy who brought that ridiculous biting round shield into the SCA.
I think so. I mean, at the time, I was told that it was the stupidest thing ever.
I mean, vastly successful, obviously, but it is interesting. Like, I never knew where it came from, and so that's cool. That's cool to hear. I'm like, okay, now I know.
Yeah. So that was my approach to being able to do the whole actual European knight image while still having the dynamics of a round shield. So I did sword and shield. I won my first crown fighting sword and shield. And then when my second crown fighting sword and shield, and then wanted to do something different, and then fought Florentine. And so I fought Florentine for a while, and I won a crown Florentine. And then I fought another war with a round shield, actually it was kind of a small Sagan. You remember that little? I think it might even be yours, actually.
Yes, it was. It was.
So I used your little like 24 by 22.
18 by 20.
Oh God, yes, it was really small. I remember that. So I fought in a crown with that one, and then Paul fought with a Nagi. Not Nagis like we know them now. This was before, I guess we come full circle. We allowed them again, but at the time, you could technically laminate pieces of rattan.
We did.
Yeah. So Paul kind of started this this design that was a kind of a 3-inch rattan pole with another 3-inch rattan pole that was offset. So they were, I mean, you've seen the pictures of them.
Yeah.
And they were like a lead bar. I look back at it now, and I'm just astounded that we fought dynamically with those, and what we did.
I agree. I agree.
It took serious technique. And so Sagan and I and Paul, in particular, the three of us, we fought with those for a while, and kind of learned how to fight against swords and shields with those. And I've always loved the bastard sword. I learned from Sanjuro the same thing, that literally the bruises that came out of that fight that I just told you about were literally 360 degrees around both thighs, and they bled down to my ankles over a 4-week period. Whenever now I get a hook or a trick or something like that, I'm like, oh yeah, I know where that came from. I'm surprised that the body still works. But so the bastard sword was a lot of fun for a long time, and then there was a period of time where I was getting some pushback from the fact that I was winning tournaments, and this is part of a kind of a social artifact that deserves other consideration. I don't want to minimize it for the telling the story, but with that said, I entered a couple of tournaments with a spear, like a 5-foot spear, to, I guess, to show what a badass I was. I mean, I look back on it, it was, I convinced myself I had noble efforts, but I'm pretty sure I was just massaging my ego. And so I fought with a 5-foot spear for a while, and it taught me a lot about fighting, and I had a very good time doing it. So as far as that, now there's the pike in wars. I enjoy pike tremendously, and my approach to pike is probably a little different from most. I play a lot with a vertical stance, and from that vertical stance, throwing the shots necessary. And I think that satisfies my desire to. It wasn't an intent. I kind of look back and I wonder why I did this. I think it satisfies my desire to have that moment of contest with the opponent. I want to shuck and jive somebody. I want them to see me. I want them to know that it's the two of us. One of the things that I've always loved about fighting. I want that acknowledgement of the exchange to be set before the shot is thrown, before the blow is thrown. And that's like in war fighting. I mean, I get it and I enjoy it, and it's all as it should be. I'm not one to. I don't feel. It doesn't satisfy me to pop somebody who doesn't, to gain an overall tactical advantage for the group. And it makes me a bad war leader. But my approach to pike is I really want the person that I hit with the pike to know that I'm going after them, so that it's a little moment of contest between, and it can just be a flit, as long as you see that, as long as I see that and they see it, that's the exchange that I enjoy and excites me. So that's and with that said, I'm spending a lot of time now during this COVID period in enjoying anticipation and all that goes into preparing for that, of fighting with an axe in single combat. I think there's a lot that, if you look at the top axe fighters in the SCA, the way that we play with an axe, there's still plenty of room, and I'm enjoying exploring that now.
Are you talking about Dane axe or single-handed axe?
No, Dane axe, yeah,
Yeah.
two-handed axe.
Like a 5-foot axe, yeah.
Yeah, and you know, we've got, you know, terrific. Thorfin's a master axe fighter. My thought to the axe is if you look at the axes that were used, they weren't as massive as manifests in the way we construct our axes.
True.
Yeah. And so it begs me to consider that the technique with those the heroes that would, you know, step into the fore and lay out a few people. There's room for a timing, speed, finesse motion that we're not seeing, that I'm looking forward to explore.
Yeah, I really feel that that's a weapon that has a lot of it's a weapon of opportunity. So it's about learning how to perceive the ebb and flow of the battle. And then there's almost no weapon more devastating than the Dane axe in warfare, but you have to understand the context of when to use it. It's not going to be, you're not going to walk into a spear wall and survive, but there's moments where when like the walls clash or when they separate, that it is the happy hunting ground of the Dane axe, and you're in there just, it's not even fighting, it's just murder.
Right.
So
it is, and the dance that the potential for the dance there. I'm very excited about the ability to see. Right now, a lot of the axe is wide-armed axe fighting, and every once in a while you have the hands together swing. I'm looking to, what I'm exploring is making those two far more interchangeable than they are now. To really have that, the swing and the long axis in play in a real dynamic sense. So I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, that's, I mean, if I might interject, we talked about a lot of your evolution in weapon styles and formats and shield styles. Let's step back, and how has your growth, or when did your real understanding start to evolve of the body mechanics and the mental aspect of that? I see a lot in some of the classes you teach and watching you fight in some videos. There's a whole lot more going on than just a weapon style. There's, you speak to the bullwhip technique from your feet up. The technique starts in the ground, and I'm a very big student of that, and I would love to hear about the evolution that you've gone through and what you're adding on to that now.
I have to credit Paul with most of that. When I first started fighting, what I had was 17-year-old wrestling team speed. I was fast. And I was sufficiently light on my feet that a light sword with my center of mass being what it is, and my feet being more or less under that center of mass, it allowed a light stick to move very quickly without the need for a whole lot of momentum control. And so when so I learned the dynamics of body motion through the two-handed sword, through Sanjuro, but I hadn't yet figured out how to translate that into sword and shield. And so Paul was the first to really, I was very much enthralled to his fundamentals that we are all very familiar with. And from there, to answer your question, it was very early, though it took a while to actually integrate it. I'd been fighting, I guess, about 4 years, and Paul, I'd moved up to Sacramento. I was going to school in Sacramento, and Paul and I were talking, and he gave me one of his broadswords. It was a 42-inch, 4-pound broadsword. And he said, fight with this for a year. And I did. And that was a very instructive year. To get that sword to do what I wanted it to do meant that my body had to do all the stuff in anticipation of the sword, in a way that really kind of realigned my sense of mass and motion and the relationship of my body to the motion of the sword. So I was aware of it early, but it took a while for me to actually feel it. And what made me feel it ultimately, I think, was Paul giving me that sword and saying, fight with this for a year. At the first tournament, and at first practice that I took that sword to, it was up in Sacramento, and I fought Kinslayer, Robbie Kinslayer, who himself was a long sword fighter and very, very
42-inch.
Yep. And I'd thrown a high, low, high. I really worked on it. A little high, low, high rising snap with this super heavy, long sword. And what I took away from that was when Robbie, he said, good, good. And he walked up to me and he said, you don't have to hit me that hard. And I didn't even know it hit him. When he first said it was good, I thought, oh, maybe did shield hit you? I mean, I didn't. So that I'll remember it to the day I die. That lesson of mass and motion and what the formula of impact is was really played out. I threw this shot clumsily against the skilled opponent, and it worked, and it hit in a way that I literally was not aware of. The lesson was lost on me in that moment.
Interesting.
Except that in retrospect, I realized what I hadn't seen. And so it created that void that I had to fill with understanding. So that mass and motion part was very much Paul. And then Sagan and I really took that and ran with it.
Truly, we truly did, Your Grace. Which leads to a question. You and I met in January of 1980. You became my trainer about April of that same year. But by the time I'd met you, you had already mastered the Spanish half round and sword, as well as Florentine, and you were making the move into katana. And I'm curious, when you were moving across those and you had Paul's assistance, how did that change your physicality? as well as your understanding of speed and power.
Okay. What I think ultimately what I understood was the sword is the slave to the center of mass. And it was a hard thing to do because, like fighting Paul, I always wanted to hit him as hard as I could, because that was the thing. Paul, the difference between bad technique and good technique was impact. And when you're fighting Paul, that's true. It's not necessarily true in other circumstances, but in those circumstances, absolutely true.
Agreed.
And I knew that I wasn't strong enough, right? I didn't have the muscle. I mean, you remember that Sagan, gosh, I can't remember what the name of that tournament was, but you and I were there, and I fought Paul in the finals, and I had a sword that was not that heavy, but I had just that quarter, that 3 months, and kind of figured it out. And I cracked up Paul pretty good.
Yeah, you did.
Yeah. And that was the and Paul recognized it as well. That was the moment of, or that was evidence of the process of understanding that the sword is the sword follows the path that your body creates. Your intent, manifest by the discipline of your technique, clears a path that is filled by the sword. And when Paul and I were fighting, and I had this, it wasn't a very heavy sword, but the whole formula of impact, and this is where I've come to today. A lot of my thoughts about power is it's all about that acceleration. You've got to have that acceleration so that whatever mass is there, if just as that point of impact occurs, you have maximized the efficiency of the rotational momentum, so it cracks.
The crack is important, right?
Yeah, and the only place that comes from is from your center of mass, and so your ability to be able to efficiently gather without wasting momentum is the key to power.
Hey, Radnor, can I piggyback on this just a little bit? I just recently in the last year, while we were in the COVID years here, for the longest time as I've been teaching stick mechanics, I refer to as stick mechanics. But it wasn't until just this last year that I realized that a lot of what I do really is the stick itself. It's not, I mean, I use my body to get the stick moving, but I like when you started fighting and when I started fighting, I never had the mass I still don't, right? Even at 200 pounds, I don't have the body mass to just put more muscle behind a shot to get it to deliver. And it sounds like what you're talking about is what it was just kind of a realization that as much as I say stick mechanics, it was this last year that I was realized, like, no, that really is what it is I am making the stick do a thing. And it sounds like that's kind of what you're talking about.
Yeah, the stick is is the extension of your body's preparation, right? So and impact is most efficiently that of speed. You want to accelerate whatever mass you have in your hand to the point where just before it hits, you're not pushing anything. It's ballistic, right? That sword, that stick is traveling at a velocity and is it impacting at an angle and an orientation that results in an excess of energy that has to be absorbed by something, right?
Well, that's the other thing is the angle of impact. If you're striking perpendicular to your target, you get better energy transfer, and energy transfer is the thing that people feel.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Resonates, yeah.
That's the crack, right?
Yep.
And
That's the snap of the flat snap.
right.
Mm.
And that's what you want. That's what you want to generate, and you can generate that relatively slowly. It's all about the moment of acceleration as it relates to the impact. So I try to approach my technique such that if I can win a fight, the slower I can move and still win, the better I'm fighting. So I want to be able to win a fight moving as slowly as possible. If I can throw a shot that is a lazy shot and hits with a crack, then that's the body of my work. I can look back on that and I can go, okay, I've learned how to do that. And that is in many ways in my mind, kind of the key to understanding the relationship of that stick, the stick mechanics, and your center of mass. 200 pounds, the stick's 2 pounds. You have rotational momentum. There's nothing that says that a 200-pound center of mass with the right vector control in a rotational momentum moment can't just launch that sweet spot of the sword in a way that it doesn't matter how big you are. I mean, 120 pounds, it's a 2-pound stick. And that's one of the things I love about fighting, about our chivalric combat, is that we're not about, some brute comes into the room and you think, oh shit, how am I going to beat this guy? It's not MMA. It's chivalric combat. And it's about testing yourself against someone else in a format where your display and your commitment to skill and discipline is manifest in being vested or not. I love the fact that chivalric combat in the SCA means that anybody can be super good, because we're not depending on genetics. We're not expecting somebody to come in, or we're not being subject to someone coming in and saying, well, what does it take to be king, my boy? Well, it takes more than just skill,
Yeah, I agree. Yeah,
right.
I think part of it is too is fundamental mechanics, right? If any one of us can learn these mechanics to create power and be able to strike an opponent, where in other sports or martial arts you have mass, right?
Right.
And you see people that are like, we don't have weight categories, for instance, right? And I've seen people be like, for instance, James Graham was a guy who massive success. I think he won 8 crowns or something like that in a time period of substantially larger fighters with heavy, very heavy swords. And at the end of the day, he still had a very slight guy, had the ability through fundamental mechanics and, understanding of our martial art, how to succeed in the face of that type of, like a different style, right? I mean, the guys that were, Paul is massive at the time, and he hit like a truck, and James was a person who managed to have success. And so you can see this throughout our entire history. It's not about size and those things. I mean, granted, being very strong and large is a huge advantage, but it's not the advantage, right? It doesn't change everything. I'm not a big guy, and I've been successful myself. So you can see that how through study and learning and mechanics and foundation, you can then have success.
Right.
Well,
It is. It's
On the other
about
side of that too is that the technique always works, right?
Exactly
If
right.
you come into this sport and you just are, if you have the muscle mass to just put more power behind it, and you never learn the technique that goes behind that. I mean, how many people have we seen that come in at 200-300 pounds and they're just, pounding people, and then they get gastric bypass and they lose an entire person, and now they can't fight anymore because they can't deliver a shot because they never learned the mechanics. It
Yeah.
happens all the time. The technique always works.
Technique.
you get the guys whose best shot was a shot that ruined them.
Yeah, right. Their body mechanics were wrong,
True.
and it blew out their elbow or whatever, right?
True.
Yeah.
You're like,
Always come-
yeah, it's terrible. So yeah,
Good stuff. Hey, yeah, Radnor, let me ask you, let me get on that. I'm gonna switch topics just here a little bit, but not too much. So I want to talk to you about the evolution of training methodology.
Oh,
You and Sagan and Paul kind of developed training methodology early on in the society. I think Paul was the person that really kind of took our sport and applied martial arts concepts to it. But I think it was early on in the early 80s when it was the three of you that really took. So there was that period that you were talking about, that period of discovery where you're like, what does the stick want to do and how does this work, and that sort of thing. And I know Paul has talked about early practices where they'd be fighting and somebody would figure out a shot, and then like practice would come to a screeching halt, and they go like, what just happened? And they're like, okay, I did this and I did this, and then everybody together starting to figure out how to do that. I came into fighting squire to Brian before. I mean, I was working with him before he was knighted. In our area, Brian was the first person that was applying physics to what we do.
Tarragon.
Brian Tarragon, yeah. And even with that, his training methodology was still a work in progress because I was his first student, right? So, over the years, he figured out a process for himself. But I'm definitely, as a fighter, I'm definitely a product of training methodology, right? Because I was even as he was figuring out what his training method was, it was no longer the just get in armor and you'll figure it out, kid, right? We like I really never experienced that, fighter that like, you either you just make it or you don't, right? Which we still see so much of in the society. It's just put on your armor and go out there and figure it out. So I wasn't really raised under that. But as far as training methodology goes, as far as like a training process, which is something that we all on the Coach's Corner are like, we all have a very clear process. So tell us about the evolution of developing training methodology and developing a process for actually teaching people how to do this beyond you just having figured stuff out for yourself.
all right. Well, if you were to talk to my squires, they would tell you that I suck as a trainer.
no way. Sorry, pal. You're not getting into that. No.
Hold on. They benefited by my training, but they had to figure a lot of shit out that otherwise would have been presented to them by a better trainer. When I came in, so much of what I tried to teach was a fundamental that was ultimately kind of revolutionary. And so that took up, the first decade of my establishing myself as how I would formulate a training construct. What I was trying to teach was what I synthesized from Paul, which was perpetual motion, and the parts that go into providing yourself a means of being able to maintain your offensive and defensive flow with control integrity. And that was a big part of my training methodology approach through the first big chunk of my fighting career. And to a lesser or greater degree, it survived as a foundation for the methodology. When Sagan and I were spending a lot of time really thinking about this sort of thing and spending the time in the helm and going through these different, I remember us doing slow work and fast work. And in slow work, we'd get a shot to work, and then we'd have to figure out how to make that work in fast work.
True. And then when we got it to work, the first thing you and I did, usually it was you would say, okay, how do I counter that? Right,
exactly. I mean, that was that so much. It was early enough, I guess, Sean, that that methodology was less a methodology for instruction as it was for comprehension.
Right.
Because of my notoriety and the success that I experienced, which was not a result of my comprehensive understanding of fighting to the degree that it can be translated and synthesized in somebody else at all.
It was just more nude success.
Yeah, I knew I could make it work because I was trying to figure it out, and I was understanding it and then doing my best to convey that to those that I fought with and people that came to me for direction, despite the fact that I might not have been the right person to go to. But Sagan and I were, I think Sagan probably is the person to say, how that methodology played out, because Sagan was better at it than I was. He really did take on board. I kind of gestalt stuff, and I'd riff. I'd say, then you do this, and then that, and then because I feel it, and I had whatever it was that allowed me to manifest this kind of flow in a physical sense. And as we would play with the dynamics of that, Sagan would be the one that would come away with it. He'd kind of chew it around, I guess. And at the next practice, during slow work, he'd do something and he'd go, yeah, remember last week you said this? Well, that's what this is. I mean, remember Sagan, at one point, you could take my arm at will in slow work. Remember that?
Absolutely. And I could get all the way up to your shoulder.
Yep. And it was, that was a great example of this, the synthesis and of kind of going through the things that we understood and then trying to figure out how to, from there, create a taxonomy and then a methodology to be able to pursue it.
Yeah. So the two of you could break it down together.
True. And then what would happen is when we got the parts together, all right, then for that short moment of time, I became the trainer, right? Showed His Grace what I had come up with. We either agreed upon it or we didn't. And then we refined it to the fact that His Grace could use it in tournament combat. And once it was rolled out in tournament combat, much to the chagrin of others, the methodology proved itself and its strengths and weaknesses of what if and what about now and what about doing it this way versus that way.
Yeah, the methodology came out of a lot of playtesting.
Absolutely.
Well, I was going to say it sounds like Radnor was kind of the case study, if you will, and Sagan was kind of the analyst looking at the case study, and then once you evaluated the pros and cons of it, then you'd be able to give that to other people.
True. And then what I would do is I would make sure that I kept whatever we developed in my repertoire when I was training with His Grace, especially when I knew he was training for a tournament, and I would mix that in and throw it at him so to make sure that the defense would handle it.
Sure.
Yeah, that was the same time of the Eagles up at
Yes.
The Eagles, the one with you and Torgel, right?
yeah. I'd fought a couple of Eagles, but this one was the one that it very much speaks to what we're talking about. Torgel had the apex of Ontarian technique, which was a narrow flat heater and a short, thick sword right about here. And the tip of the heater would be here and the sword would be here. And the speed, that little circle of the mass starting and the dimension circle, that Torgel was he was super, super good. And a bunch of
Yep.
super, super good. And Torgel had come down and smoked the West at a crown that William the Lucky won in the finals. And I was in Hawaii visiting home when this happened, and so I heard all the stories about Torgel.
And you heard about how you weren't there to stop him?
Yeah.
A little of that, but actually it all came to a head at a party in Westermark, where Leon von Schrecken, people were talking. Torgel was saying how he could take Radnor. He came to the West, and Radnor wasn't there, and he could take him. And at this party, there were several people saying, "Yeah, Torgel's he's just that good. I bet he could take Radnor." And I'd walked into the room, and I was an easy mark. I was young and full of myself, and so when I know Sagan, you were there. I think it was Yer Deganata who said, Radnor, Torgel says he can take you. And I said, yeah, maybe he can. I mean, forcing those words out of my mouth just because I was kind of on the spot and I wanted to be humble.
A little magnanimous there, yeah.
Yeah. And that's when Leon piped up and said, so, Radnor, how does it feel to be the second best fighter in the known world?
Yeah. From there, yeah.
Oh my God, that's an ego punch in the dick.
Right, exactly. I was like, yeah, it sucks. And then, and that's when I called Leon, like, because he'd been begging to be my squire for a couple of months, and I pushed him off. I said, okay, you want to be my squire? He says, yep. I said, you're going to be my pal. He goes, I'm your pal. And Sagan and I, and he, Sagan and I worked on deconstructing that Ontarian.
Literally, I had to learn how to fight Thorfin style.
With Torgel,
I'm sorry. Torgel's style to a point that I could present it to His Grace. And it was one of those things where I was like, I'm not sure I can do this justice. So, but that's where we went. We're still talking methodology here.
I mean, so Sagan, you're no Torgel.
Pardon me?
You're no Torgel.
That's true. You know what? Torgel said that too. So.
So what we did was we figured out the sword back, point up, anticipatory rotation, and then the shot. And that's what I went up to Ontario with and won the tournament.
Yep.
And it was out of that exchange between Leon and Sagan and myself. So from that kind of is born a methodology, right? That sense of or that approach to understanding a current set and how to deconstruct that current set and apply present best practices to it.
Right, right.
Yeah.
Many
One of
ways.
one of the main things we learned, right, is if we could mimic it, we could synthesize it, take it apart, and then it's like, okay, so if it's a defense we're working on, we could go there, or if it was an offense we were working on, we could go there. The idea was we literally had to have the example in front of us.
And
right?
we also
So one of us had to be able to do it.
we also knew that what we were doing was we were grabbing corner cases. We knew that we weren't really seeing inside our opponent,
Right.
taking the greater construct of their advantage and trying to deconstruct it in a way that provided us a corresponding advantage.
Right.
Knowing that what we understood was just the tip of the iceberg. So just like the axe, it wasn't a panacea, and it wasn't an improvement that made the thing that we were fighting against obsolete. What it was an opportunity to burnish it, to chink away at it, to just
Right.
a slight deviation that might provide us an advantage, and out of that be one of those iterative steps that we look back at as part of the evolution of what made us better.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Florida was truly our first proof of concept on that.
yeah. Well, the reason I bring this up is I have seen several pretty major revolutions in our sport. I mean, of course, there was Paul who applied martial arts principles to the sport to begin with, and then in the mid '80s, there was Brian and Trelon and Torgal, and right around the 20-year period there was another major shift in technique, where fighting technology improved a lot, and there was a real just there was a shift that I'm sure you were part of as well, and the biggest like seismic shift that has happened since then has been in the last 15 years or so when we've started teaching our sport better, and now we are applying a lot of this methodology, and that some of the, and that's kind of how the Coach's Corner was born. Branos and I have been doing this, and of course I got it. I mean, my training DNA, as it were, comes from Sagan, and we've been doing this for a while, and that's been the most recent significant improvement in the sport overall, is that we're teaching it better. And so, yeah, I just kind of wanted to get some ideas about like how that all started and kind of how we got here, because now I think the way that we teach our sport is far better than just throwing people out there and hoping that they get it.
Oh yeah, we were just trying to figure shit out.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Literally, that was the somebody would hit someone and we would all stop and go, how did that happen?
Right.
And someone would say, I think I did this and I think I did that, and someone, no, you did this. And yeah, so the first 20 years, I mean, that's one of the reasons that Paul was so dominant and had such an influence, was that he was taking fundamentals that were well established, that swordsmanship in the context of the SCA had yet to experience. So he brought us into the 19th century, right? He kind of brought us into modern understanding, and then from there the refinements began to happen.
Yeah. Awesome.
We got a great question from the audience, and I think especially for your style and what I've seen of your fighting and your philosophy, it's question is, are you still fast? If not, how has your fighting changed? And I think that's a really great kind of lead into the difference between speed and perceived speed.
Right. So speed, yeah, that's great. Yeah, when I first started fighting, absolute speed was a big part of my fighting. I really wanted to take advantage of that opportunity to be able to, do the 0 to 60 thing um, in a way that won the fight. Um, what that was essentially a part of a continuum that is no different than what I experience today, just in in a more nuanced way. Speed is all about knowing what comes next, right? It's absolute speed is absolute speed, but absolute speed is met by absolute speed, right? So if I happen to be, super fast snap guy, um, all it takes is somebody else being a super fast defense guy.
Yep.
And so that, my advantage that I may have built my ability to survive on is inconsequential at that point. And I'm not a swordsman at that point. I'm just a guy with a fast stick. So speed is all about knowing what's coming next. So what I'm trying to do with speed is to influence what's coming next. I want to influence my opponent's perception of what's coming next. One of my favorite experiences that I've talked about in the past is William the Lucky, who was one of the early giants of the Western chivalry. He wasn't flashy at all. In fact, he was anything but flashy. If there was an antithesis to flashy, was soggy. I don't know. He was that. He wasn't
He was like big motions the whole time.
exactly. But those motions were he and Stephen McHenry. Stephen McHenry was really the master of it, and Lucky was, all part of that school. But it's all about the speed of recognizing that there's a spider on your shoulder, right?
Yeah.
When you see that spider, man, everything boom gets super fast. But the spider's been there for a minute, right? Like, where'd that spider come from? Spider's always been there. Right? So it isn't. Speed is a tool. It's a construct. It is a thing that is manipulated. There is no fast or slow.
And it can be defeated.
So we talked a little bit, you and I, about the idea of understanding timing and how timing actually is more important than actual physical speed, because the perception of speed is affected by your timing. So the fact that you threw a blow and it's on its way and your opponent isn't reacting to it correctly because you've thrown it properly, and then suddenly it hits them, they believe, holy Jesus, that was super fast. When in reality, what you did was you timed them as well as, you beat them, their defense. And so
right.
This is a huge element of what perceived speed.
Right. I got taken off track, or I took myself off track when I was talking about William the Lucky. I was at a crown tournament at Big Trees, and there was a relatively green fighter who was first or second round, and he drew William the Lucky, and they exchanged a couple of blows, and then William just threw this, he figured out his opponent's timing, and then he threw this completely dump truck of a shot, and it just bypassed his opponent's shield and cracked the guy in the side of the helmet. And we all said, oh, that was really, really nice. And then the fellow walked past me off the field, and he's shaking his head, and he's saying to his comrades who were greeting him, man, I did not see that coming. Wow, was that fast? And we were like, man, you could serve lunch off that sword, right? It was not fast at all.
Yeah.
So I really got to see the dynamic of what that is. So yeah, speed is Absolute speed is in many ways, to my mind, inconsequential.
Yeah, we did last year. We did actually 2 episodes on speed. We had Ron Valder and a couple others on talking about it. And one of the things that I've always looked at, the difference between the various types of speed. I mean, hand speed is convenient to have. Having done a lot of Pell work in my early years, I've got some hand speed. But I think the thing for me that is far more important than that is decision making speed. The speed at which we process information and make the decisions, and that's something that as you mentioned, you have to learn how to slow down the physical response in order to develop that mental decision making speed.
Well, that's one of the things that I like about with my students. I'll do speed games. The hand slaps and off the thigh cracks, and you have one hold up his hand like it's a shield, and elbow out 90 degrees, thumb behind the ear, throw a shot, slap the hand, right? If they can move it out of the way in time, you miss, right? And all of that is it seems to be a means of making you faster. But the real intent is a means of getting your perception to speed up, right? You're trying to understand the cycle of your opponent's defense, and from there, that's where speed comes in. Slow or fast. It's all about being inside your opponent's sense of you. That speed, that your control of their perception is what provides you the means of being able to dictate what speed is.
Good liars can be very fast.
Absolutely.
Thorfin?
I'm gonna like kind of lead into a couple kind of a question that we're going to be discussing in future episodes as well. Is that first off, I'd like to say, so you've had success for if I remember correctly, you've won crown in 4 different decades. Is that correct?
Yeah, let's see. 79 in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s.
So yeah. So as you move forward through your career, and also you're a person who's had at least 2 pretty catastrophic physical accidents. So what is your advice, or how do you approach your staying healthy in your body, as you move forward through the time of your fighting from 17 to now?
Yeah, so fighting in armor, especially starting when we did, was really hard on the body. And the moving forward, like I'm not ready to stop. I've been in and out of practice many times. I've had life require that I focus on other things for any number of years. Last time I was in armor at this point has been, I don't know, years. I've been out of practice for a long time, but I will be back in practice again, as I have been back in practice in the past. And the approach there is to have it come from the very inside of you. Out of that, with efficiency, provides you a means of creating the motion in a way that works, that isn't destructive. You're not trying to grab someone else's thing and make it happen. You're not trying to win something. You're not trying to prove that you can lift, these objectives that we often can create for ourselves in fighting I don't believe you have to do it. Fighting is an intrinsic thing. Swordsmanship is an intrinsic thing. And your body, if you begin from the inside out and understand that the sword is the stick mechanics are just the manifestation of the efficiency of your mass and motion and the kind of the purity of your intent. I want to be that, that old, growing up in Hawaii, we'd go to Hotel Street and see the Chinese kung fu movies, and there was always the super old dude that kicked everybody's ass.
Right.
That's I think that's chivalric combat. I mean, it may not be sure at a high pinnacle of heroic excess. That's reality, but it's actual reality in chivalric combat. We have a means of an equal field upon which one can determine whether or not they've been invested.
So would you say this is what you're this kind of mindset that you're talking about right now? Is this kind of what you're working on right now? Is kind of like your current kind of mission idea is to figure out this idea?
Oh yeah, no, that's I want to be able to manifest what I have committed myself to and learned through the years. Fighting is always in my head. I've talked about this, Thorfin, it's naked swordsmanship, right? Swordsmanship is an ethos. I practice swordsmanship when I rake the lawn, right? I honestly believe that if somebody can't, mop a kitchen efficiently or do dishes in a way that has integrity, they're not going to be a good swordsman. Their swordsmanship exists everywhere. It's the efficiency, it's the intent, it's the willingness to be wrong, it's the willingness to lose. The ultimate, the eternal new is naked swordsmanship. I want to recognize what I know, but not to the extent that I fool myself that there are things that fool myself that things that I don't know don't exist, right? It's very important to manifest swordsmanship from a place of its potential, and its potential is in aligning yourself to the world in a way of constant wonder. I am a complete beginner when it comes to swordsmanship.
I like to call that beginner's mind.
Say that again?
I like to call that beginner's mind. You always have room to learn.
Right. But I mean, really, like, I'm an idiot, right? There's so much that I don't know. And what I'm going to continue to do as my body ages is to take what I think I've learned and test it against my ability to marshal the efficiencies of my body.
Right. I think that's important to recognize as we go forward, as we age, we have to mentally, we talk about this a lot, self, awareness in our activities, and to say, like, recognize where you're at, and understand the physicality of where your body's at too, right? And so it's, we can do things to slow down and prevent aging, but let's be honest, it's coming. And it does affect all of us. So I think it's a very authentic thing to say, is that, what exactly what you're saying is to look at the approach of how, you are where you're at right now in your sword fighting career.
Oh,
yeah, and that's where it's one of the reasons that I want to embrace slow fighting. You fight as slowly as you can, and that proves your technique in many ways. I mean, that's obviously, there's plenty of technique that's That's a matter of youth and speed. But if you're able to take what you know and uh, make that work at a tempo that is lazy, then it gives yourself a lot of room as you get older.
Well, Radnor, I have to say, I would encourage you to get back to practice whenever you feel like it, and I say that from a very selfish point of view, because I have been very blessed in my career to have been surrounded by literally the best fighters in the history of our sport from day one, and you, sir, are on a very short list of people who I've never had a chance to fight.
Yep.
So should
Fortunate.
the opportunity present itself, I would like that. And going along with what you're saying is, I have no interest in beating you or being beaten by you. I want to be on the same field as somebody who I consider to be part of the fabric of our society, somebody that has shaped what we do, and just to be on the same field at the same time would, I mean, be, and I have been on that field. I remember years ago at Estrella, Brian set me up with a fight with Paul, you know, at the end of the day at Estrella, and it might have even been my first year fighting, you know, and it was, I mean, you know, Paul just destroyed me, and he was very generous in you know, in indulging, you know, this other night and in fighting me, and then I had an opportunity to fight Paul years later at the Known World Rattan Symposium, and you just to be on the same field with somebody who has shaped it. That's what I'm looking for, and I think it kind of goes along with that ethos that you're talking about. Is like just, I mean, how lucky are we? How
I know,
lucky are we to be part of something like this?
Yeah, I agree with you. One of the things that Redner talked about earlier was this idea of like chivalric combat. And chivalric combat, what makes us different than even the guys behind me here, right, who are incredible athletes and incredible fighters, is that we have a code of conduct, kind of a guiding ethos that separates us. So we're not just warriors. Anyone can be a good fighter. It takes a lot of mental preparation and also kind of you know, self-awareness to be a knight, and it's like following the path that these people set for us, you know, almost 1,000 years ago, right? That's what we're talking about, is that the difference between just being a fighter who can hit people with sticks and a knight, and having people like Sagan and Radnor and Sean and lay down these kind of ideas for us to all follow. It's a very unique martial art, and that to me is when Radnor says this pursuit of chivalric combat. That's it's we may be the unique place to find this, and so we have Sagan has one more question, and then we're going to start the wrap up. Okay, guys.
Okay. Your Grace, remembering those two young men years ago whose quest was knowledge, whose experience was asking questions, and whose determination was unbounded, I salute you, my friend. I thank you for your training, and I thank you for your friendship. However, I do have a question. There are those now who are just starting. There are those now who are those two young men. And I would ask you, what recommendations, and keep it simple if you'd like, but what would you tell them of our experience and how to keep it going?
Well, if I need to tell them how to keep it going, then I question their motivation. With that provocative sentence, I will say that one of the things that gets in the way of people keeping it going, despite their engagement and their fervor and their commitment, is confounded expectations. and a lot of times those expectations come out of the social fabric of fighting in the SCA. Too many good fighters, or too many fighters have lost the opportunity to be able to experience what we've kind of been talking about, this lifelong satisfaction and pursuit of swordsmanship, and specifically chivalric combat, because of the social minefield that is tournament fighting in the SCA. The chivalric combat is about being better than yourself yesterday. And if that's your measure, you'll never get tired of life, right? When we fight, the people that win are the people who've been declared winners by the person who felt bested. And that is a foundation that makes us unique and is what keeps it alive in my mind. But with that said, it's easily perverted by those who would take advantage of that. And it's that moment of inflection between the ideal and the reality of social engineering that gets in the way of a lot of folks being able to maintain their passion throughout their life. And there's any number of approaches that I'm happy to talk about under the appropriate purview. I would say that swordsmanship is about losing. It's about recognizing where you fall short. It's about recognizing where you've invested. It's about embracing your failures. From there, provides you the means of looking into the future to overcoming those things. And if you are guarding against them, which is what many of us do when we start to fight, we want to win. We don't want to lose. Right. We kind of we short circuit the integrity of swordsmanship. And
fear of loss.
Yeah. Fighting not to lose, as opposed to fighting for the joy of fighting. And so when we talk about how to help those two guys, those two fighters, those two people, full of ambition and hope, I would say that one of the things that we can do is to recognize as a community that this is not a sport. And I hate to say that out loud right now, but it's not. It's an art. It's we are fighting ourselves. And when we think that we're fighting other people, then we are ignoring the battle that is in front of us, which is the battle with ourselves. And one of the ways that we might be able to make a difference to that end is in tournaments, there should be no conversation about whether or not the shot was good. It was either good or wasn't. The question is location or orientation. Was that a shot that hit me in this spot? Because we don't always know, right? Whack, that was a good shot, but it wasn't, it was a thrust, and it wasn't hard enough to go through my helm, but if it was in my face, it was good enough, right? So at that point, you go, boom, you register a good shot, and you ask, face or helm? They say face. Done. You can go down. The shot that hits the back of the leg, and when the marshal says, oh, that was flat, orientation, great. Beyond that, the discussions that happen while fighting in tournaments is a huge part of what gets in the way of people's enjoyment of the pursuit of chivalric swordsmanship. And my belief is that there is nothing to be gained whatsoever by accepting that in tournaments, someone can negotiate a shot. In practice, you talk about it to the end of days. I mean, you want that conversation. You want, how did that shot hit? Where, that felt funny. Did that hit this? Did it hit? All those conversations are appropriate. When you step on the tournament field, we should be willing to let go of that and not take it onto the tournament field. When we take it on the tournament field, we take personalities and intent and plans and expectations and all those things that have no room on the tournament field. The tournament field is all about the manifestation of all those things that went before it, not a work in progress. So this is what I would say moving forward. Those two fighters, just know that you suck and know that you have nothing but everything to learn for the rest of your life. And isn't that freaking cool? And to the rest of us, to stop negotiating during tournaments. Don't do it. I'll have a conversation under the most under appropriate purview, where I would challenge you to show a time where a fighter being struck, asking questions about that blow that weren't orientation or location, that in any way, shape, or form was appropriate. If we take that out of our fighting, those two fighters have a much better opportunity to be able to have a lifetime of fighting in an environment where everybody is working with the same sense of humility and willingness to act chivalrically.
Yeah, I've always worked on the calibration theory that if somebody doesn't take a shot that I throw, it's because I didn't do my job right. And there is perhaps an argument that can be made that sort of thing encourages people to as you say, to capitalize on the system that we have. And I don't know that I don't know about that, but what I do know is taking that responsibility on myself has spared me 30 plus years of aggravation, wondering who cheated me back in the 80s. And like you said, carrying that baggage and carrying that emotion and what you know about somebody. And last time I fought this person, they didn't take this thing from me. That's going to affect your fighting, and it's going to keep you from just being able to fight free and being able to just execute for the sake of execution. And I know my view on it is somewhat controversial, and because I mean, calibration problems happen, but I know for me, if I take that responsibility on myself, that is the one thing I can control. I can hit you better. I don't have to hit you harder. I can hit you better.
Yeah, that's I take that on board, Sean. You're absolutely right. If you think for a moment, what is it that defines what we do that is different from the folks behind Thorfin's head, right? Is that we don't have a judge imposing a result. We have a person being bested recognizing that. And so we celebrate that, and that's all good, but we don't actually practice it. That we're not walking the talk in tournaments. If that's true, that it's all the person who is being bested acknowledging it, then we should actually make that happen in tournaments. We by allowing us to undermine the integrity of what makes us different, we stop being different. We're now just another sport and we're arguing with umpires, but made the umpire our opponent. So if we're going to be special and call ourselves a a sport, an art, or whatever that is different because we're the only one that the victor is declared so by the person who has lost. Then we've got to actually play it out. We don't get to say it and then
Right.
not it when it comes to the tournament.
So let me jump in here, and I'm going to start to wrap things up. I want to say first off, I think that part of that is a breakdown of the concept of communication between the two fighters, and I'm going to tell you that this is just systemic throughout the entire SCA. Is I think that if we all were to take time to remember to talk to our opponents at practice, to where it's not only a time where you talk to your opponent, where it's a perceived failure in their chivalry, right? I think that these type of things would lead a lot to that. But that being said, I think that first off, I want to thank all the coaches for tuning in tonight, guys. You guys were awesome to be here. Your Grace Radnor, thank you for being on our show, and I mean, really a lot of great information there. And I also have to say that coming up, I think our next episode is going to be our anniversary show, guys. And so this is 1 year of the Coach's Corner. And if you have, we're going to go through like kind of all of our favorite episodes. And so make sure that if you guys tune in, that you throw in some questions for us in the comments, and we will then try and address those. Also, comments about this show. If we didn't get to your comment, guys, the coaches are real good about jumping in and replying to them afterwards. Okay, so thank you very much, friend, and like us and share our show. All right, and thank you. And Vesper, I'm going to throw this right back to you now.
Oh, am I muted? Okay, the pressure is on. So everybody, I hope you have a wonderful, wonderful weekend, and everybody be safe this following week. Definitely tune in next Friday for another episode. And again, thank you to all our lovely coaches. We will see everybody again next week. Bye.
Well, thanks.